All right. Assalamualaikum everyone. My name's Naureen. I'm going to be one of the panelists today. And I'm just going to pull up our presentation. Okay. Um, thank you all for joining us. We are going to be talking about the MD-PhD program and kind of what it is and how, you can be a successful applicant to it. So my name is Naureen. I'm also part of AMWPA, and we are going to be starting off with a quick Quran reading. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. And so these were passages from Surah Alaq. And the translation is, read, O Prophet, in the name of your Lord, who created humans from a clinging clot. Read, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught humanity what they know not. And so I also, before we begin, want to talk a little bit about AMWPA. So the mission of AMWPA, which stands for the American Muslim Women Physicians Association, is to improve the condition of women's health, provide a platform for Muslim women in medicine, and also raise awareness of issues regarding community welfare. The overall motto is preventative healthcare is our passion. And AMWPA was formally structured as a nonprofit 501c3 in 2008. And so with all of those introductions and prayers out of the way, I will formally introduce our panelists. So a little bit about me. I am a third-year MD-PhD student at UT Southwestern, and I am wrapping up my first year in PhD, first year of PhD work in cell and molecular biology. I did my undergrad at UTD in neuroscience, and both Sara and I will be going into kind of why we got into medicine and specifically MD-PhD a little bit later. But I think my story mostly began in UTD, and I will let Sara explain her side.
All right, assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Sara Ghalayini. As Naureen said, I'm also an MD-PhD student. I'm wrapping up my fourth year in the program. So our program is a little bit structured a little bit differently. We'll get into that later, but I'm also finishing up my first year of PhD in cancer biology. I'm originally from Lebanon. I grew up in Canada, did my undergrad at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia. And yeah, as Naureen said, we'll be going into a little bit more detail about how we got to where we are, kind of what attracted us to this path. So, all right, just a little bit of introduction about the MD-PhD program in general. I'm not sure what kind of demographics we have on the call, if it's mostly undergrad or high school students, but in general, the average timeline to complete these programs is about 8 years. When you graduate with both an MD, a medical doctorate, as well as a Doctor of Philosophy, a PhD. For the most part, these programs are fully funded and train you in both medicine and research. It doesn't necessarily have to be in scientific research, like Naureen and I are both doing, but that is the most common path. And in the end, these programs essentially train you to be a practicing physician scientist. That means that you practice both medicine and perform research on the side, whether that's scientific research, clinical research, translational research. There are a lot of options. You can choose to do the most common and perhaps the most complementary is translational medicine. But we can talk a little bit more about that later on. There are about 100 MD-PhD programs in the country. if you're familiar with kind of the path, you may have heard the term MSTP. It's the Medical Scientist Training Program. Typically, these are programs funded by the NIH. And there are, I think the program's capped at 50 programs nationwide. And there are a lot of programs that aren't MSTPs who are in the process of applying for MSTP designation. And so that number of slots is pretty rigid. And so they're in the process of updating that over the years. Next slide. So why should you do an MD-PhD, or perhaps who should do an MD-PhD? Really it comes down to having a passion for both medicine and science. Ideally, this career path is very well suited for those who want to do translational research. And so what that means is that's typically known as the bench to bedside track. So you're doing research in the lab that informs your clinical practice, and your patient experiences in the clinic further reinforce and contribute to your actual basic research in the lab. And so what you get out of the PhD really is you learn how to ask scientific questions, how to design experiments, how to design trials, and get the results that you want. And so really, you don't necessarily get that in medical school. And so that's really the benefit of doing this program. You get formal training in scientific thinking. And so really the best thing about this is, you get to learn for a living. Even once you're a professor at the end, or whatever you choose to do afterwards, you still practice this idea. You're essentially a lifelong student. You're still asking questions about things that we don't necessarily know the answer to, and working to find out those answers. And so it's a very, very rewarding career path for all those reasons. All right.
And so like Sara mentioned earlier.
Oh,
What?
no, sorry.
Okay. So like Sara mentioned earlier, MD-PhD is approximately 8 years, and it can vary mostly depending on how long it takes you to finish your PhD. But this is a graphic that was pulled from the AAMC, who has a really good, which is a really good resource if you're interested in MD-PhD, and we have that linked later. But as they show here, the first 2 years are mostly med school. So you'll be doing med school classes, and basically you're fully integrated with the medical school curriculum. Occasionally you'll have some MSTP specific classes or sessions. So for my school, we had weekly MST faculty talks, which were just introducing us to different faculty members on campus. And then in the summers, we would do lab rotations. So every PhD student has to do lab rotations before they end up choosing which lab they are eventually going to do their thesis with. And so usually for straight PhD students, they do that in their first to second semesters of their PhD years. But for us, we scatter them in between our med school years. And so that's why we have some grad school here. Years 3 to 6 are usually doing mostly grad school work. So you are fully integrated into PhD work. You are working in the lab, you are taking grad school classes. You are doing what you need to do to graduate with your PhD. At this point here is when you defend. And so that means that you have completed the required PhD work, you have completed your dissertation, and you have successfully defended your project. And at this point, you have completed your PhD. And then after that, you go back to medical school, and you are finishing up whatever med school that you hadn't done before. So places such as UT Southwestern, and I think the majority of programs around the school, we do this breakdown of 2-4-2, where you do 2 years of med school, 4 years plus or minus a couple of years for grad school, and then finishing off for med school. Places like where Sara goes to MD Anderson, UT Health in Houston, they do 3 years of med school, then go into their PhD, and then finish up grad school. So at the end, it's still, comes out to about 8 years, but again, it's pretty variable depending on your PhD work and also what school you end up going to. And so then what are some of the outcomes of MD PhD students? So the vast majority of students will end up in academia, and that means that they are faculty and professors at institutions such as the institutions that we study at. They are often PIs, which means that they are running their own labs, or they are other sorts of teaching and clinical faculty. A couple of them, about 5%, end up in research institutes. So these are people that are simply doing research, no medicine aspect to it. Industry is kind of the pharmaceutical industry or biotech or other sorts of industries. And so this is from, I believe, 2014 and or sorry, 2010. So I believe these numbers have probably changed, especially since the rise of industry. A couple of people are in private practice. So that means that they are doing, they're only seeing patients. They aren't doing much research-based work. And then the other 3% could be in a variety of other fields, not necessarily related to science or medicine. And so we have a quick breakdown of how you can be a successful MD PhD applicant if you are at that stage right now. Again, we don't really know what your demographics are right now, but if you are a sophomore, a junior, maybe a senior in college, and you are gearing up to apply for an MD PhD, at this point you are putting together your application, and so that is going to be the point where you are compiling everything together. But if you are earlier along in your journey, you really have time to mold your college experience to highlight some of these things here. And so the main overview is that to be a successful MD PhD applicant, you want to be a great MD and a PhD applicant. Unfortunately, you have to be you kind of have to be great at both things. And so to be a PhD student, to be a great PhD applicant, you want to show that you have had lots of dedicated research time. You are able to explain your research well and show that you have a passion for research. This can be shown by you presenting your work at conferences and poster sessions. And, if you can try and get papers published, although this is the thing that is most out of your control. And then I think like the most important thing is to have good letters of recommendation from research mentors who have seen you in the lab or have seen you work firsthand on your research, if it's computational or wet science based, which just means that you're actually in the lab doing like pipetting or whatever. And so they're able to talk about how your work ethic is, but also how you approach questions and troubleshoot, because a lot of science is about troubleshooting. And then to be a good MD applicant, you want to make sure that you have a good GPA, you are scoring well on the MCAT, you are getting those clinical hours in to show that you are actually interested in pursuing medicine as well. Volunteering is always good for your MD application, and then making sure that you have good letters of recommendation from clinical mentors who have seen you, with patients and kind of can vouch for your work ethic there. And so that was a pretty rapid fire run through of what it takes to be an MD PhD applicant and also what an MD PhD is. We've linked the AAMC, their MD PhD website, for a good overview of resources. But if you are interested in specific institutions or specific programs, it's always great to look up their MD PhD program specifically and read up a little bit more about that. But yeah, this is kind of like the end of our formal presentation. But Sarah, if you wanted to kind of talk about why you wanted to get into medicine, and specifically why you wanted to do an MD PhD, and then we can open it up to the chat.
Sounds good. I'm just going to drop my email address in the chat. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out, especially as you're getting closer to applying if you do decide to go down this path. So I had never met anyone who had done MD PhD. I didn't know any practicing physician scientists or anyone who was currently enrolled in a program. And so I actually found out about this path by accident. Um, there's a annual symposium that UT, my current program, and the Baylor MSTP host every year. It was in person until COVID. Now I think it's still online. It happens every year in around January. I'd encourage you guys to look into it. It's the Cullen Trust for Higher Education Symposium on Translational Research. It's a really, really great program. I saw a flyer for it, applied, and was invited to attend. You get to meet and hear from students in these programs who are pursuing an MD PhD. You get to hear from practicing physician scientists on the faculty. And you also get to hear from the program directors at both of these programs about how to develop a successful application and how to, have the best chance of getting accepted to any of these programs. And so it was really at that program where I actually found out that this was a viable career path that people pursue. Hearing about people working in medicine and people working in science, it's often difficult to pursue either of these paths. They're quite demanding. And so meeting people who are managing to do both and enjoying their lives and seeing that it hasn't really been detrimental to them in any way was really, really helpful to me. I love the clinical side, all of my clinical experiences, shadowing and volunteering during undergrad and high school showed me how much I love having that patient interaction and having, that tangible benefit to hopefully improving a patient's quality of life. But my research experiences during undergrad really showed me how much I enjoy the scientific aspect and how much potential there is for your work to impact people more positively on a much larger scale. And so those were really kind of the things that drew me in. For a while, I was trying to decide between pursuing, a PhD and just attending med school as an MD only student. And so when I found these programs, it was really, really exciting for me. Um, and so I hope that, this panel and this presentation kind of serves as that for you guys, whether or not you know any other MD PhD students or practicing physician scientists. So definitely feel free to reach out at any time. I'll let Naureen tell her story now.
Yeah. So I started out wanting to do medicine, I think vaguely. I didn't really have a good understanding of what it was like. No one in my family is a doctor, and so I didn't really have a good understanding of what the lifestyle or anything was like. But I came into college wanting to do something medicine adjacent, and at UTD there was a pre-health track, and so I had signed up for that, and I was given an opportunity with the program that I was in to do research before I started actual classes um, before my freshman year. And I really got into research and I continued along that path. And it was like really exciting to like start my own projects and continue on trying to troubleshoot and all that stuff. And then I got another opportunity to do research at UT Southwestern. And again, I really enjoyed that opportunity. And so I realized that, I think I really do enjoy the research aspect of it. But at the same time, I was getting my clinical hours in and still doing everything that I wanted to do to have a good MD application. And so the research was uh, kind of like a adjacent to that. Um, But I realized a little while later, and then afterwards, there was a girl in my lab who was applying to MD-PhD, and that's when I realized that, oh, this might be like a viable option for me. And when I was applying to, or when I was gearing up for my application for medical school, I had to sit down and make the decision if I wanted to do an MD PhD and really commit to the 8-year long training program, or if I wanted to do an MD. And because I really like the research so much, if I could just do like a research distinction or um, kind of do research on the side or something like that. And what it really boiled down to was I wanted to make sure that I was getting a good scientific training in like a formal scientific training that I knew that I wasn't going to get if I only did medical school and tried to do research on my own. And I see that really well played out now that I'm in my first year of my PhD, because I know that if I hadn't done this path, I wouldn't ever have gotten the training that I have gotten already so far. And so I'm really glad that I was able to, see that, like have the opportunity to get the MD PhD awareness, and then also like kind of follow through on it and have people that were ahead of me that I could ask questions to and see how they were able to get in and what things that they really specialized on in and really highlighted in their application to make sure that they were portraying that they really wanted to do an MD PhD. So yeah, I think now we have a few questions in the chat. So Sarah, I'll ask you these. When do you start applying in college for this program? Does UTA SMU have this program?
Yeah, so as for which schools have programs, I can drop a link in the chat to a list of MD PhD programs organized by state from the AAMC, American Association for Medical Colleges. So that's a pretty good resource. Texas as a state has a lot of programs, as I'm sure you'd imagine. So typically when you're applying for medical school or for MD PhD programs, you start applying a year before you matriculate. So for anyone that's applying this cycle, the applications opened this summer. You submit it. And so the way the admissions process works is it's a rolling process. So the sooner you submit, the earlier you will be invited for interviews, the better your chances. So application opens early summer, submit as soon as possible. And then interviews happen all through, late summer into, I want to say like January, maybe February at the latest. You go to these interviews, and then programs typically release their decisions at different times. Some have earlier dates, some have later dates. You should have heard back from most by, late February, early March. Get invited to revisit dates at the institutions you are accepted to. You attend those revisit dates, decide where you want to attend, and then typically you have to decide where you will be attending by May 1st. And then you officially matriculate that summer or that fall, depending on whether or not you're doing a research rotation before you start your first year. So typically you apply a year before you matriculate. And so sometimes people take gap years, sometimes people do it while in undergrad. If you will be taking a gap year, you can do it a year before you plan on starting. If you're applying during your senior year of undergrad, you start the application at the beginning of that year. Does that answer the question?
And then if you have any clarifying questions, we can also post them in the chat. Okay, so then the next question is, do you apply to residency after the 8 years end? And I can take this one. So yes, if you want to practice medicine, you have to choose a residency and apply. And you go through the whole match process like you normally would as an MD only applicant to get that specialization. And then if you are specifically interested in a certain type of fellowship, like for example, after internal medicine residency, then you would again do that. They do try and streamline some of that residency time into these things called PSTPs, which is called a physician scientist training program. So it's kind of the residency equivalent of an MSTP. And in this case, you have certain programs are different, but for some programs such as internal medicine, you are applying to a fellowship at the same time as you are applying to the residency. And so you are shortening the amount of clinical training that you're getting. So you're not doing a lot of the, like instead of doing 3 years and then 3 years of fellowship or residency and a fellowship, you are shortening that to 5 years, give or take. And then you are doing, let's say, 3 years of clinical training and 2 years of research training. And so that is your postdoc. And so for those who don't know, a postdoc is what the additional training that you do after a PhD, and that is getting you prepared to be an independent researcher, to start your own lab and to get grants and things like that to really fund your own lab. And so some programs have combined these two things together for the clinical training and the research training and trying to streamline that process. So the short answer is yes, you do apply to residency after 8 years. The amount of time that it takes is dependent on what residency you do and if you want to do a PSTP or another combined research integrated program. Okay. The next question is, I wanted to ask if you recommended taking a gap year to get more publications, etc. Do you want to take this one?
Sure. So honestly, it's up to you. No one really knows your application better than you do. No one knows, your goals and the types of programs that you're looking to attend better than you do. I don't think it's necessary, but if that's something that you want, to get more publications or more writing experience or learn some additional techniques or pick up any other skill, I think then it might be worth your time. But very it's very dependent on you. I've known people who have taken gap years, others who have not. It all comes down to personal preference.
Yeah, I agree. I think that taking a gap year specifically to get more publications might be difficult to do because, again, publications are very much out of your control. Like Sarah said, if you have a specific skill you're trying to pick up or trying to get more research hours, I think that would be a good idea to really solidify if you want to do this path. But if you're sure, I wouldn't hold your hat on trying to get more publications. Yeah. And then could you repeat the symposium that's held near January, the name of the symposium?
Yeah, I can actually drop the flyer for this year's symposium. It's actually happening on the 24th, so this is like perfect timing. It's on Zoom, so you're welcome to attend. Let me find it. Okay. Just sent it. If you have any other questions, let me know, but it's Monday evening this year.
And then someone asked, do y'all have any tips for the TMDSS application? And would you be able to review my personal statement? So we won't be able to review your personal statement right now, but I think we can give overall tips for the application process and then also the personal statement. So just a clarifying point is that if I recall correctly, the MD-PhD application is through AMCAS and not TMDSAS. TMDSAS is only for Texas MD and DO schools, I believe. And so the PhD, the dual degree PhD, so MD, PhD, or even DO PhD, I'm not too sure about the DO PhD actually, that will be on the AMCAS website, which is the website that all the other schools use for their application. They do have very similar essays. So you can write up one essay and it should be applicable to both application processes. But I guess for the personal statement, just an overall view is that you will submit your personal statement that is very similar, that is kind of explaining the passion for why you want to do an MD PhD specifically. And then the other essay is about your research experience. So the research experience is a little bit more cut and dry about what were the research experiences that you've had, what you've learned from that. And the MD PhD personal statement is more about what draws you into this program. And again, it's very personal. I think the most important thing is to make sure that you have a good story to tell. A story as in you are connecting all your anecdotes together through with a good through line. And I think the most important thing is just to make sure that you are being, I think you should be honest in your personal statement. We've read a couple of personal statements before, just like going through our going like at this point in our careers, and it's very easy to tell who is just saying what needs to be said and who is actually really passionate about what they want to do. So yeah, do you have any other tips?
I think you pretty much covered everything. The only thing I'll say is, at the end of the day, when someone reads your personal statement, it should be very clear how you got to this point and why this is the best next step for you. That's really all that it needs to say. As Naureen mentioned, the MD-PhD application does take place on AMCAS, and there are several essays that you need to write. So in addition to the personal statement essay, there's like a why MD-PhD essay and an essay about your research experiences. And so you don't necessarily have to cover everything in your personal statement. You honestly shouldn't try to do that. It really just needs to convey why this is the best next step for you and what drew you to this path.
Okay, the next few questions are specifically about Southwestern UTD, so I can go ahead and answer those. What is the best way to get in with UT Southwestern research internships slash jobs? I think really the best thing that you can do for any research internship or job is just go ahead and emailing the professor that you're interested in. I know that that worked for my undergrad. Some other institutions or some labs will have specific job openings and stuff so that you can look specifically at those. But I found success with just cold emailing and saying that why you're interested in that lab specifically, sending in your CV, and explaining maybe your past experiences would be helpful as well. If they have a job opening, that's great. You can, meet with them, interview with them, see if that would be a good fit for you. If not, you know, maybe they can redirect you to someone else. And then what is the name of the research program for PhD at UTD? I'm not sure what that one might be referring to. If you want to clarify that, and then I can answer it in the chat later. But Sarah, do you have any other ideas of what is the best way to get a research internship?
I think in general, there are a lot of programs geared towards people at different stages in their careers, right? And so this kind of also addresses the when do high school students prepare for this? I don't necessarily think high school students should be overly concerned about preparing for this at that stage in their lives. As a high school student, as I said before, even as a, early undergraduate student, I had no idea these programs exist or that people, choose to do this with their lives. And so I think in high school, you should really be concerned with trying to figure out, what your interests are, and even during early undergrad. And so one of the ways you could do this if you are interested in science is to attend any of these different summer research programs. There are a lot. I know MD Anderson has several, that we have several undergrad and high school students at our programs right now. If there isn't an official program close to you, you can even email different professors and ask if they'd be open to having you in their lab. I think really having experience with these things is the best way to see if this is what you want to do or not. And so I think in each of these major undergraduate institutions, there's a lot of research going on. If you really want to get a good idea of this, if this is something you want to do, go ahead and see if they have any openings for any students in their labs. It doesn't necessarily have to be as an official position as a research assistant or something like that, or a full-time job. And then there are a lot of external summer research programs for undergraduates, especially like the Amgen Scholars Programs, a lot of the summer undergraduate research fellowship, SURF programs, um, and a lot of other ones as well that you can find online.
Yeah, and then piggybacking off of that, um, someone else asked, what are your thoughts on picking a major in undergrad to prepare for an MD-PhD program? I do think that you don't have to choose your major depending on if you want to do an MD-PhD program. Both Sarah and I didn't even know that this was an option until way later in our undergrads. And neither our major didn't hinder us in any way. I do think that if you are interested in doing medicine in any capacity, either an MD, PhD, or straight MD or DO, there are certain classes that you have to take. And so, whatever program, oops, I'm sorry, I just lost my screen. Okay. So whatever program you do decide to do should should work, but it's the point that you are taking the prerequisite courses that's necessary. So like, the sciences that you need to take, however many biology courses, how many chemistry courses. But you can fit that track in no matter what program you end up doing, or what no matter what major you end up deciding. Yeah. Um, and then there's another question. I think this is a good one. Do you recommend applying to summer research programs at schools around the US, like Green Scholars, to get research experience? And what are the benefits to doing these as opposed to just working in a lab at your school? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a lot of benefit to doing these like formal, structured research programs. Um, a lot of times they also have like built-in activities for like professional development. Sometimes if they're geared towards like specifically MD PhD programs or MD PhD applicants, or anyone that wants to be a clinician scientist, they'll have like MCAT workshops, they'll have like personal statement workshops and sessions and things like that that I think are pretty valuable. You'll also get to meet a lot of other students from across the country that are interested in following a similar path as you, and you may or may not see them around on the interview trail and at different conferences in the future. So I think there's a lot of value in that. And it also gives you, exposure to more fields, to how research is practiced at other institutions. And so there's definitely a lot of benefits to this. I think in addition to, research at your own school throughout the school year, this is especially helpful for anyone that may be at a smaller school that doesn't have a very strong research program. And so it really would give you that exposure. Typically, these programs are quite short, and so as far as expectations for things that you'll get out of it, a lot of it is in those intangible benefits. So just go into it with the right mindset, and I think you'll get a lot from the experience. They also typically have like a formal poster session at the end, so you'll get some experience with presentations and things like that as well.
I think the specific programs I can think of at the top of my head are um, Amgen Scholars, SURF. Do you remember any others?
Yeah, so Amgen's has a lot of really great programs. The SURF programs that I mentioned before are really great. There's also a lot of research experience for undergrads, REUs. Just there are a lot of websites online that'll have a list that you can go through and see. Some of them are geared towards people who are more interested in like a career with some degree of clinical exposure. And so some of them will have like built in like clinical shadowing time. So definitely look into them and see what, fits your interests best.
Yeah. And then the last question that we have right now is where we can see publication examples. So you can always see what a published paper looks like by going to something like PubMed, type in whatever example or like whatever research you're interested in, whatever field you're interested in, and you'll see what a paper that we're talking about looks like. Um, yeah, it would be great to when you're applying for research positions or if you're cold emailing professor, it's great to go ahead and type in their name into PubMed and see what their latest publication is on because that will give you an idea of what they're currently working on or what they were working on. And so you're going into that conversation a little bit more informed. You might not understand, half of the words that are in that paper, but it's still a good idea to kind of get a good overview of what they're interested in. You guys have any other questions, you can put them in the chat, but Sarah and I can re-put our contact information in the chat too if you're interested in reaching out to us individually. But yeah, we're sticking around for a few more minutes if you guys have any other questions. Let's see. Do we have any research related activities we could be doing on our own time at home besides participating in labs? Mm, hmm.
Um, I feel like it's a little bit tough. It kind of depends what area of research you're interested in. The most obvious thing that you could be doing is, reading research papers, trying to get more familiar with the literature and, with the field that you might be interested in going into. Um, and, it also kind of gives you ideas for projects that you might want to do and how to expand your own research interests. I think another thing would be if you're interested in like computational research or like something like that. There's a lot of programs online that you can try out, like modules and things like that, to learn like Python, R, different skills that would be helpful for that. Um, Outside of that, I can't think of too much off the top of my head.
Yeah, I also can't think of anything else unless you're like affiliated with a lab and it's time for manuscript writing or things like
Mhm.
that. That's a good way to get in your writing skills because that's also a really important part of research, but those skills come later. The first skills that you kind of have to learn is how to do research itself. And so um, usually you have to be affiliated with a lab to do that.
Yeah, there are also other types of research, like there's clinical research and things where you're not necessarily like in the lab. Computational research as well. A lot of it is remote, but you can't do that if you're, just on your own at home. You need to be affiliated with a lab and have gone through the proper trainings, and certifications to be able to access that information. Any other questions?
Okay. The negative stigma of being a doctor as a female are rising. What obstacles have y'all experienced? Tough, tough question. Um, Let me think. Um, do you have anything off the top of your head?
It's kind of a loaded question. Um, is there anything specific that you're referring to? I feel like, honestly, like in my medical school class, if we're talking specifically of stigma being a doctor as a female, I think the majority of medical students in my class were actually female. Um,
Oh, I see. I'm applying this year as a 28-year-old, and it's been terrifying with marriage and kids. I see. Um, I it is tough. But I think having a good support system is super helpful. Obviously it depends on where you get in, but alhamdulillah, I'm very lucky to have a great support system here. Um, and you know, I do think that like I feel like your life isn't put on pause all of the time that you're in training. Because although, you're not like living lavishly or anything like that, your tuition is being paid for, you're getting somewhat of a stipend. And so, I feel like life will go on no matter if you do the program or if you don't. And so if it's something that you are really passionate about, I do think that it's worth exploring. And sometimes you just have to come to that decision on your own by doing a lot of soul searching. Um, but I hope that having good having a good support system, having good mentors around you, having people um, or seeing people that have come through on the other side um, is a good way to see what your life would look like at the end. Um, oh yeah, and then the research program that I did with Southwestern was Green Fellows. It was a Green Fellows research program. Yeah. Or did you have anything to add on to the last question?
no, I think you pretty much summed up the same sentiments that I have. I think it's a big commitment, but with the right people around you and the right support from everyone, obviously, you being in training for 8 years or however long it would take, depending on the program that you choose, is going to affect the people in your life if you're married and you have
Mhm.
kids. It's pretty important to make sure that everyone is on the same page at the beginning and try to, make sure everyone's expectations are set in a way where no one will be overly disappointed or anything like that. So I think really making sure that you understand fully what's involved in the programs, what you're kind of getting yourself into is also important. So having this exposure from these research programs and these clinical experiences will help with that. But also making sure that, you're on the same page with everyone and having that support network, like Noreen mentioned, is really, really important in making that happen. But it is possible. I've met a lot of people who were in that same position, whether it's for med school or MD PhD. A lot of people do it and come out on the other side successful. It is challenging, but if it's what you want, you can make that happen, inshallah.
And then this is a question specifically about Green Fellows. When you apply for this program, I feel like they've changed the rules recently. Excuse me. But I think that you can apply as a sophomore or a junior for the following spring semester. You can find out more by going on the actual website. It's been like 4 or 5 years since I've done it, so a lot of things have changed. But I think that's a really cool program with UTD, UT Southwestern. Um, yeah. Someone asked, are gap years acceptable if you do end up getting pregnant? Have y'all met anyone who was able to thrive? Um, I do know someone who was pregnant in our medical school. Um, actually know a couple of people, and they did not end up taking a gap year. Um, but I think it's also like very school dependent. Um, I think someone else was in the MD PhD program and they took a gap year. Again, it's like very, very like individualized. Um, And it just depends on the relationship that you have with your advisor, like your PhD advisor, if you're in that position, if you're still in med school, or if you've come back to med school, then it's about your relationship with the medical school and also kind of how your pregnancy is going. If you want to take a gap year, things like that. It's very, very individualized. But yeah, they were able to thrive. Little babies are growing. Yeah. Um, so yeah, I think that is all the questions that we have, unless someone has a last minute burning question. Thank you all for coming and hearing us talk about our program. Um, we just wanted to raise awareness of the MD PhD program because I don't know, we actually didn't mention this earlier, but there's only about like what 5% of the class that is MD PhD in any medical school class. The cohorts are really, really small depending on the program. It can be between 1 or 2 students to 20 students per year. Um, and so, you're part of a small community nationwide, but I think it's a really rewarding career and a really rewarding training program. If this is something that you really want to do. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to stop sharing and we're also going to turn off the recording now.